England did not collapse into fear overnight. There was no single law, no single execution, no moment when people suddenly realized something was terribly wrong. Instead, it began quietly, inside the court of a young king, who was supposed to be England's golden future. When Henry VIII took the throne in 1509, he was everything a Renaissance king was meant to be: handsome, athletic, charismatic, educated. He spoke multiple languages, loved music and poetry, and dreamed of glory. Europe looked at England and saw promise. No one imagined that this same man would one day rule through fear, rewrite religion, execute close friends, and permanently scar the English monarchy. This is not the story most people think they know. This is the story of how absolute power, insecurity, and obsession slowly transformed Henry VIII, and how England paid the price. Henry became king at just 17 years old, inheriting a stable realm from his father, Henry VII. Unlike his cautious and miserly father, Henry VIII wanted to be admired. He wanted to be loved. More than anything, he wanted to be remembered as a great king. In his early years, Henry ruled wisely. He relied on experienced advisors. He avoided unnecessary cruelty. The court was vibrant, filled with music, debate, and ambition. England felt modern, confident, alive. But beneath the charm was a dangerous flaw. Henry was obsessed with legacy. In Tudor England, legitimacy meant everything. A king without a male heir was a king inviting civil war. Henry had seen what dynastic instability could do. England had barely survived decades of internal bloodshed before his family came to power. And so, from the very beginning, Henry feared one thing above all else: dying without a son. At first, it didn't seem like a problem. He married Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish princess of royal blood. Their union strengthened England's position in Europe. It was politically perfect. But years passed, and the sons never survived. Daughters were born. Sons died in infancy. With every loss, Henry's confidence weakened, and that fear began to change him. By the 1520s, Henry was no longer the carefree Renaissance prince. He was anxious, suspicious, increasingly impatient. He became convinced that his marriage to Catherine was cursed, not politically, but spiritually. He believed God was punishing him for marrying his brother's widow, even though the Pope had approved it years earlier. And so Henry made a decision that would change history. He demanded an annulment. But this was not a private matter. Catherine was the aunt of the most powerful man in Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor. The Pope was trapped politically. He could not grant Henry's request without risking catastrophe. For the first time in his life, Henry was told no. And Henry VIII did not accept no. What followed was not just a marital dispute. It was a battle for supremacy between a king and the church itself. Henry began removing anyone who opposed him. Advisors who urged patience disappeared from favor. Loyal servants were replaced by men who told him exactly what he wanted to hear. The king was no longer surrounded by wisdom. He was surrounded by obedience. When Rome refused to bend, Henry did something unthinkable. He broke from the Catholic Church. In a stunning move, Henry declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England. Overnight, centuries of religious authority were shattered. The Pope was replaced, not by a council, not by reformers, but by Henry himself. This was not about faith. It was about control. Monasteries were dissolved. Their wealth was seized. Religious leaders who resisted were imprisoned or executed. England's spiritual foundation was torn apart, not through debate, but through royal command. And then came the executions. Men who had once been Henry's closest friends, men who had served him faithfully, were accused of treason for refusing to acknowledge his supremacy over the church. Some were beheaded in public. Others vanished quietly. Fear became a tool of governance. And Henry learned something terrifying. It worked. As Henry aged, his personality darkened. A severe injury left him in constant pain. He gained weight. He became isolated. His temper worsened. Paranoia took root. The court became a place of whispers and suspicion. One careless word could mean death. Loyalty no longer guaranteed safety. Henry's marriages during this period reflected his instability. Women rose quickly and fell just as fast. Accusations of betrayal, treason, and moral corruption became weapons. Whether true or fabricated hardly mattered. Trials were rushed. Evidence was thin. Verdicts were predetermined. Executions became spectacle. What terrified the court was not just Henry's cruelty, it was his unpredictability. No one knew who would be next. England had gained a king who ruled not through law, but through fear. By the 1540s, Henry VIII was a shadow of the man who once dazzled Europe. He was isolated, suspicious, physically broken, and emotionally hardened. The friends of his youth were gone. The court obeyed, but no longer admired. He had achieved what he wanted, absolute authority, but it had cost him everything. When Henry died in 1547, England did not mourn a beloved ruler. It endured the consequences of his reign. Religious divisions deepened. Political instability followed. The monarchy's moral authority was permanently damaged. Henry had secured his dynasty, but at the cost of England's unity and trust. Henry VIII did not fall in battle. He was not overthrown. He was not defeated by enemies. He was undone by power itself. His reign proved a timeless truth of history. When authority is unchecked, even the most gifted leaders can become dangerous. Henry did not begin as a tyrant. He became one, and England would spend generations living with the consequences of that transformation.